looked in Holocaust studies. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that. Of course, the concentration camps, we're talking about those. And then I don't want to end on a bad note, right? So I'm going to end like sort of some signs of hope with Maximilian Kolbe. I also have in there a little bit Edith Stein or St. Teresa Benedict of the Cross. And then I was able to get the Pope Pius XII this morning. So that's the hope, is I can make it there this evening as well. So let's begin. You know, we talked last time about this kind of growth of this Jewish question, of kind of this increasing sort of hostility and these kind of measures, the boot on the forehead of the face of the Jewish people. You know, sometimes it's just social excommunication, sometimes it's economic repercussions, sometimes it's an outbreak of violence in Kristallnacht. But the Jewish people could clearly see that the tide is rising against us, and things are not looking good, right? And many of them didn't emigrate. Many of them did leave, right? But not all of them. And so they come to this kind of 1941, July 30th. Erwin Goring is a very eccentric man, right? He's the head of Luftwaffe. And he orders Reinhard Heydrich, to the head of the Reich Security Office and of the Gestapo. He writes him a letter and he says, come up with a solution to this question. And he wants a solution for a couple of reasons, because Operation Barbarossa is they can clearly see that this is going to take a lot longer than they had anticipated, right? This isn't just going to be a matter of weeks and months. This is a huge thing we're against here, right? This country is way bigger than we thought. Their industrial capacity is way more than we thought. Their resolve is much more deeper than we thought. We're in here for a long battle. And so we need to figure out what we're going to do with these particular race of people that we don't care for. The Wehrmacht is stalled at Moscow. There's a British blockade. There's a poor harvest in 1940 and 1941. So there's a shortage of food for the Third Reich. And so the Germans are like, we have a bunch of mouths to feed that we really don't need to feed anymore, right? There's 11 million mouths to feed. So can we figure out a solution for these people, and how do we get rid of them? We talked about the Madagascar kind of plan, like, do we ship them to an island and let them starve to death? That was sort of not tenable. But now these opportunities in the East, as they're moving east into Russia, are opening up. So they said, maybe we can do something in the East here with these particular people. So Heydrich calls for a conference in a suburb of Berlin called Wannsee. That's why it's called the Wannsee Conference, for a quote-unquote final solution to the so-called Jewish question. So 15 senior bureaucrats, and Adolf Eichmann is there. He's the kind of master of transportation. He's there. And you have all these kind of different sort of governmental high-ups, if you will, many times second in charge. So, for example, obviously Hitler's not there, Himmler's not there, Goering's not there. So some of the highest ups are not there, but the kind of second in charge are really there. And they all come together on January 20th to have a little conference. And it's actually a fairly short conference. It's not days. It's just an hour and a half long to talk about what are we going to do with this entire race of people. And as one commentator says, to show you kind of the kind of cool cavalier sort of mentality, there's chilled water, there's vintage wines, there's expensive cognacs, there's fine crystal glasses that are there, there's high-quality hors d'oeuvres, all in the midst, mind you, of soldiers that are losing their lives, that are freezing to death, there's starvation everywhere. So they're living a very different life here as they decide what's going to happen. Notes are taken. Adolf Eichmann is I believe he was the secretary. All the documents are distributed amongst the officials. They were all supposed to be read and minutes kept, but they were supposed to be burned. Even this commentator says that even the Nazis didn't really want a record of this kind of conference in the minutes of what they were talking about. Now, fortunately, sometimes these are either flukes, but as John Paul says in history, there's never really flukes. There's just divine providence that sort of moves things. One copy just failed to be destroyed, and maybe the doc knows why that is. It just made it through the war and was discovered. And you can actually read online what happened in this conference, minute by minute. Who said what? What were the discussions? How did it go? I find it to be fascinating that God somehow allowed this one document for all the world to see, in some sense, the kind of interior sort of workings of this very, very nasty regime. So there's the villa right there. I mean, it's just a beautiful place. And actually today, If you're in, Berlin and you go to the suburb there, you can actually take tours, and they have the pictures of each of the Nazi officials, the recordings of the minutes. You can see where they sat. You can see everything. So you can imagine it's a very kind of sober place, right? A very somber sort of place, even though exteriorly it's very beautiful. Heydrich actually wanted to use this for his villa, right, his own personal place, had he made it through the war, right? Remember, he was assassinated by British intelligentsia. So these 15 Nazi officials discussed their plans how to destroy this entire people, and get this, in a space of 90 minutes. I mean, my gosh. 6 million Jews, of course, would die. They wanted to kill all of them, right? All 11 million. And it's some sort of a comparison here. This is the population of North Carolina. The entire state, imagine, is wiped out in the year of 2024. Now, I just want to be clear here. It's not like they came into this thing and said, we're not sure what to do. They all had an idea what they wanted to do, right? They all had an idea that we know we want to get rid of these people. We just want to make sure we coordinate efforts. We want to make sure we're all on the same page. We want to make sure that you're with me, right? We're all on the same page. We're going to work together in this, right? So it's my understanding that Hitler had actually quietly amongst his own people, he had already determined that they're all going to die, right? It's a matter of how are we going to do it, and how are we going to coordinate efforts to do it, right? And I think it was actually about a month earlier Hitler had sort of decided that this is what we are going to do with these people. Let's make sure we're all on board. Let's make sure the state is on board with this, right? Let's make sure that we all have your support. We're all going to work together, and all this sort of trains are going to run on time to make sure this happens. Also keep in mind, it's not like systematic shootings and killings were not happening already. So, I mean, like basically 5-6 months earlier, in the summer of 1941, they're already killing hundreds of thousands of people, are already being murdered before this. So, for example, operations on in this place called Helmo, which looks like Chelmo, but it's Helmo extermination camp. They are already basically asphyxiating 150,000 to 300,000 Polish Jews in these kind of gas-modified vans, right, this carbon monoxide. They're already doing this. This is an experimental camp that Heydrich has his eye on that basically says, let's figure out how to do this most efficiently. So let's just sort of experiment how we can kill these people in a very systematic, efficient, quote-unquote, clean processing sort of way. So they're already behind the scenes figuring out how can we do this. So they're learning, evil's learning in some sense, how to do this well. Great picture of Heydrich there, man. Just a very cold-hearted man, my goodness. By the way, this is kind of a weird thing. His grave, I think it was just the last couple of years, was dug up. Somebody dug up his grave, like his grave robbers, to get his sword and stuff like that, and to get some of his paraphernalia that's in there. So there are some weird people out there, without question. And they, of course, what do they want to do? They want to sell this stuff, right? Or there's these kind of neo-Nazis and this stuff. So there's very much still a cult after these guys, without question. It's an unmarked grave, by the way. So Heydrich speaks of this. Now, what we're going to talk about, if there's anything you don't remember about this evening, is just to say to yourself, what evil does is it takes language and it twists it, and it uses words as cover for something else that it's really doing underneath. It uses it as a cover. So it actually uses language in some sense as a weapon. And this is, the devil likes to do this, right? He likes to play on words that maybe like mean one thing one way or another way. So for example, they would say things like, there's looming possibilities in the East. Well, what the heck does that mean? What do you mean possibilities, right? For us, possibility seems like a good thing, right? But for them, possibilities is like, this is an evil thing, right? The possibilities for we can kill them. Emigration has now been replaced by, now use words like evacuation of the Jews to the east. So in one sentence, Heydrich basically discloses a new, decisive, genocidal phase in this Nazi dictatorship in their prosecution of World War II is really becoming a race war. Heydrich then showcases, what he does is he lists all the countries, and he says, okay, here's all the countries, right, under our thumb, and here's basically how many Jews are in each country, right? So they're just listing them out. And by the way, the Germans, for one of their gifts, I mean, they don't only make great cars, right, but they also make they're just very efficient, and their record keeping is impeccable, right? They just are great record keepers. And actually, it just comes out to, in some sense, for the world's benefit to see exactly what they did, right? You can look at their records of all that they did. So what he does is he plans to comb Europe from west to east. He wants to prioritize some of the Jews from Germany, Austria, and the Czech Jews first. And he's going to sweep up later also the countries that they begin to gobble up, right, or they begin to conquer. And so those Jews will be brought in as well. They're going to be, as we talked about last time, there's transit ghettos, like the Warsaw Ghetto. And these are basically not permanent solutions. These are just temporary way stations until we figure out what we want to do with these people, until we get them to their final home, their final destination, and quote-unquote resettle them in the East. Very little debate at this Wannsee conference. There wasn't a lot of debate. They all sort of were on the same page. The only problem there's a little bit of debate in terms of this Mischlinge, this mixed race, like, who's a Jew and who's not a Jew. So, like, what camp do they fall in? Are they German? Are they Jew? So they really kind of come down to, like, basically, if you have one Jewish grandparent and you're married to a German, a full-blooded German, you basically get exempt, right? You get an exemption. So if you have two Jewish grandparents or more, it doesn't matter what you say, we consider you Jewish, right? It doesn't matter if you're baptized, you're Jewish. They had a couple exceptions. For example, if a child was born out of wedlock, or they looked Jewish, what does that mean? And then, or act Jewish, they were put in the Jewish camp that were there. So they're arguing basically, how do we know what camp you fall into, what bucket? In other words, whether or not we exterminate you or let you live. Heydrich asked for the assent of everyone. It was given in 90 minutes. We have 15 officials determine the fate, in some sense, of millions and millions of people. So after the meeting, I picked this up at one of the little research that I had. I mean, this is just unreal. Heydrich, Mueller, and he was the head of Gestapo, Eichmann, who's the transportation guy, they have a little party afterward, right? They have some brandy, they have a cigarette, right? They sort of relish in their decision. Eichmann later recounted it was rare to witness the very austere Heydrich enjoying alcohol in a cigarette. He's a very, very austere man. A bit like Hitler also was very austere as well, right? Never ate meat, never drank, right? They would go party, he would never really party. He was just in some sense, the guy had this kind of weird discipline about him, whereas other world leaders would always kind of fall apart or whatever, but he had this kind of weird thing about him. He was disciplined in a weird kind of way. Also, they would use lots of language at this conference. Instead of saying, we're going to kill all the Jews, they would use language like final solution, or they would say the evacuation to the east, which was basically the deportation of Jews to extermination camps. We're going to resettle them. And by the way, a lot of times, naturally, human beings have questions. So if all your Jewish neighbors are getting put on trains, what's the natural question you answer? Like, where are they going? What's happening to these people? And they would say, we're resettling them. We're going to train them with jobs and give them new families, or they're going to have with their families. And they would actually make videos. Goebbels would make videos and show, like, here's what's happening. Look how happy they are. They're very, very happy there. So it's very, very sinister. They would also use phrases like they're going to receive special treatment. This basically is direct euphemism for mass murder, particularly those deemed unfit for labor upon arrival. You're going to receive special treatment, they would say. They'd also use the word processing a lot, cold, a very industrial term for the entire extermination process. This includes the selection, the gassing, the burning, the disposal of the bodies as well. They just use the word processing for this. I found this quote by Socrates: the misuse of language really induces or begins evil in the soul. So whenever we twist and use languages for evil purposes, it introduces evil in the soul. By the way, do we still do this today, twist and use language? You better believe it. It bothers me to no end when we say pro-choice. That's ridiculous. It actually angers me. What are you choosing to do? You're choosing to kill an innocent human being, period. Stop using the word choice to kill human beings. Just say what you're doing. We're killing our children. That's why we're pro-life as Catholics, period. We don't kill innocent people, and we don't use words that way. So we are pro-life people. We defend children in the womb, and we defend our elderly as well. We don't use words like choice to kill people, or euthanasia that's coming around the corner as well. That's a Nazi mentality, to get rid of people who we consider unworthy of life. That is not a Christian mentality whatsoever. The Wannsee Conference is a coordinated, systematic, state-sponsored effort, administered processes deportations, set up death camps, coordinated train schedules, and a system of divided labor. The state-sponsored, systematic, industrialized fashion of an unprecedented murder of 6 million Jews, sponsored and carried out by the state, is what defines the Holocaust. Now, I'm going to get into the Holocaust by bullets, which, frankly, I virtually knew hardly anything about before this class. When I thought of, like, the Holocaust, I always thought, oh, Auschwitz, or Treblinka, or Sobibor, or, these different, extermination camps. But keep in mind that a third of our Jewish brothers and sisters' lives were taken by shootings. 2 million Jews. And this really was really the springboard for the actual industrialized camps. This is an area of study that has been vastly overlooked. And there is a particular priest, one of my brother priests, and I think he's from France. Kudos to him, Father Patrick Dubois, has really spent his entire life in priesthood of trying to better understand and highlight this aspect of the Holocaust and trying to bring to light many of these Jewish people whose lives were lost in this particular way. So the Holocaust by bullets refers to the systematic murder of over 2 million Jews in Roma by the Nazi mobile killing squads, the Einsatzgruppen. Other German units like the Order Police and the Wehrmacht, and local collaborators across Eastern Europe, primarily in the occupied Soviet Union, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and the Baltic states, between 1941 and 1944. This method of mass murder, largely by shootings in these unmarked pits, was the initial phase one of the final solution, and really a precursor to the industrialized killing centers, these death camps like Auschwitz. So I want to talk a little bit about with you this Holocaust by bullets. So this is about a third of the 6 million Jewish victims in the Holocaust before the industrialized camps really got up and running in a big sort of systematic way. Reason, the idea here is they're doing this for years, and they said, this has taken a huge toll on our SS guys, our troops, it's psychological control. I mean, can you imagine every single day shooting people, right? That is just not normal for human beings, right? That is a lot of grotesque violence, death right in front of you. So they said, at some point, we have got to find a different way, right? That's more efficient and quote-unquote clean for killing people. So initially, these mobile killing units, as the docs a couple of sessions ago, so the Wehrmacht would come in, they would conquer the city, and then the Einsatzgruppen would come in afterward. And these guys are just kind of cold-hearted, the quote-unquote sons of light, would first start shooting all the just Jewish men, but, eventually, by August 1941, they're killing everybody who's Jewish. Women, children, elderly. They're taking on entire sort of villages and camps of people. So what they would do is they would round them up. They would march them to the outskirts of the city. They would force them, get this, to dig their own graves. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're digging your own grave. They would strip them naked, and then they would either shoot them and have them go into the pit, or they would get them into the pit and shoot them there as well. There is a video or two out there that, and I don't really recommend it, but I've seen it before, where you can see the Jews getting out of the trucks, run down, get in the ravine, standing on dead bodies, and they would just shoot them right there, right? I mean, they have it right on videotape that you can watch. I thought about showing it to you, but I thought that seems a little bit much. You're like, thank you, Father. The pictures are enough, right? So I said my prayers there. I spare you that. So this Kamenets Podlaska, it's in Ukraine. This is 23,600 Jews are murdered by German and Hungarian forces. And this isn't a period of like a couple months, 3 days. Imagine a stadium full of people. It's more than a hockey rink, or more than like a basketball arena full of people. In 3 days, they shot this many people. The victims, 14,000 to 16,000 Jews who had been recently deported from Hungary, large portion of the local Jewish population. So you can see here kind of a grainy picture here of these poor Jewish people, right, that are, and children that are there that are stripping down to be killed. This, at the time, was the largest massacre of Jews in Ukraine during the summer of 1941. It really signals a pretty decisive shift in the Holocaust. We're no longer just targeting males. Now it's just indiscriminate killing of any Jewish community. The transformation throughout the fall of 1941, so we have tens of thousands of families, men, women, and children are shot in ravines, open fields, and forests throughout Ukraine. And then you have Babi Yar, and Babi Yar is near Kiev. This is a month later, September 29th or 30th, 1941. 33,771 Jews are murdered in just 2 days in Babi Yar. Shortly after the Nazi occupation of the Soviet city of Kiev, notices were posted and ordering all the Jewish population to gather at a specific location near the Jewish cemetery. Bring your belongings, bring your documents, bring your valuables, and we're going to resettle you. And then they just went out and just shot them all in this big, huge ravine. The Jews who arrived there, they're forced to undress, their papers are seized, they're led in small groups, they're shot by the SS and German police units, by machine guns, and then covered over with dirt. I mean, imagine just the trauma. And just, I mean, if you're waiting in line, I can't even, there are no words to describe the psychological trauma of seeing your own family members being shot right in front of you, right, that are there. This is cold-hearted stuff. This is one of the worst, most gruesome sort of quotes. There were people of every age, children, old people. They had been told to gather because they were going to be taken to work somewhere, and that they should take some food and their children because there would be nurseries in which they would be looked after. The Jews had a sort of armband. Then they were told to undress, and they were thrown into the pits. At the end of the day, I went to look. The earth was moving, since many had not died right away. That is a horrific, horrific scene. I just have a couple images for you. I don't want to overdo this. But here you have the Jews digging their own mass grave here. Here you have an image of the SS here shooting. You can see the Jews down in the ravine there with their backs turned to them. How does somebody deny this stuff? I mean, that's mental illness, in my opinion, at this point, or just diabolical evil. So the Commissar Order is an illegal decree, really. So the idea during war, some people think there aren't any rules during war. That's simply not true. There's always rules. And one of the rules is if somebody waves a white flag and says, look, I surrender, you're not supposed to shoot them, right? I'm no longer a combatant, right? Now I'm surrendering myself to you. So you're a PO, a prisoner of war. This particular order said all those rules are out the window. Because they are an enemy of us, and they're an enemy of the human race, and because they're an enemy of our way of life and our way of thinking, it doesn't matter what. You see them, you shoot them, period, right? Because they're a threat to you and a threat to the Third Reich. So here's what the Commissar Order said. This is before Operation Barbarossa. The German Armed Forces High Command on June 6, 1941, when fighting Bolshevism, or basic communism, one cannot count on the enemy acting in accordance with the principles of humanity or international law. In other words, they're not even human beings. They're beasts, right? They don't have rationality. They're subhuman. In particular, it must be expected that the treatment of our prisoners by the political commissars of all types, who are the true pillars of resistance, will be cruel, inhuman, and dictated by hate. Therefore, when captured either in battle or offering resistance, they are to be shot on principle. In other words, just shoot them as soon as you see them, and you're a hero. That's heroic for you to do that. Breaks all rules of sort of war. There are still rules in war, and they drilled that into us in the seminary. Don't think that everything goes out the window. There's still a morality in war, right? You do not shoot innocent people. You do not shoot women and children. Frankly, when we're talking about this, you don't bomb entire cities, right? Because there's innocent people in cities. In an order dated July 11th, 1941, this is also disturbing, a commander of a police regiment in Belarus recommended that Jews be shot on the outskirts of towns and villages to shield local residents. We don't want the local residents to see this from the sights and sounds of mass murder. Now get this, in order to erase the impressions of the day, to soothe their conscience, the order also called for evenings of camaraderie to follow every mass killing incident, which typically included meals prepared by local residents, music, and dancing. What are they saying there? Have a party afterward, right? Soothe the pain, right? Drink it away, right? Numb it. This is a numbing activity, right? Very, very, very evil. If you get into some of these concentration camp stories, it is just appalling because you have obviously one way of life that these poor people are treating so inhuman, and then on the other end of the fence, these people are living high off the hog, having parties, drinking, and just, I mean, you just think the dichotomy is just unbelievable. As the doc said, World War II in some sense is a study of human nature. It's a study of human nature, of what we are capable of, and how we are capable of being desensitized towards each other. Victims were often forced to watch their own family members and neighbors die before their turn came. In some cases, victims, this part, look at this, were forced to lie down on top of previously shot corpses. You're standing on dead bodies before being murdered. Local policemen and German officials often requisitioned non-Jewish civilians. So in other words, they have the Jewish people do the dirty work. Dig pits, fill in mass graves, collect clothing, sort out the Jewish valuables, pull out teeth, transport Jews to pits in their carts. These were mostly young men, women, children, adolescents, not only present in the event, but also had been forced to participate, depending on tasks opposed by the Germans. So they're forcing the Jewish people to do the dirty work here. And you're going to see this in the concentration camps. These folks, it's called the Special Command, the Sonderkommando, basically, in my opinion, is the worst of the worst. So they would pull some men that came off the train and say they're very able-bodied and say, you come with me, I'm giving you a special job. And so they would bring them around over to the crematorium, and they say, get going. And so their job was to do literally, we're going to talk about this, the dirtiest of the dirty work. And then eventually they would just kill them too, right? So they'd actually put them under as well. So Himmler here, if I'm missing one here. So Himmler is asked to see a shooting demonstration of the SS demonstration in Minsk in August 1941. The victims were digging an open grave and had to jump into it and lie face downwards, sometimes on other bodies already shot. So there he is. He's standing on the edge of this thing. He wants to see this himself. He's the guy in charge of all this. Himmler had never seen dead people before in this manner. And one guy says that one of his officers with me, he said Himmler had the bad luck of having a man shot near him, and the man's brains were splattered on his uniform and on his face. Himmler then went very green, kind of lost his balance. He looked like he was going to heave and throw up, and began like heaving, right? And you're like, do you see the irony here? You're the guy carrying all this out. And you're the guy, I can't even handle this, right? You want us to do this all day long. So after the shooting over, what does Himmler do? He gathers the SS around him, and he has seen for himself how hard this task is, and so it must be worth him. So what does he do? He turns this into a heroic thing. This is patriotism. They must stand firm, and they could not be relieved. He appeals to their patriotism, telling them that they must do their duty for the 1,000-year Reich. You guys are heroic. He leaves the future to sort out for yourselves, and then he leaves. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So just a couple points on the Holocaust by bullets for you. First of all, this is an overlooked area of studies for a few reasons. One is because the Holocaust studies is kind of a newer area of studies in its more full depth since the 1990s. Second, I think we're all in some ways drawn to the Auschwitz syndrome, which is basically a tendency amongst historians and philosophers and political scientists, and the general public to want to focus on these sort of extermination camps where 2/3 of the people's lives were taken, right? So I think that there's kind of, this gets overlooked because it's not, this is a horrible word, it's not like glamorous, it's like, it's not as, you can't see it, right? So it's much more hidden and invisible. So I'm very grateful for this area of study that's really beginning to open up in recent years. Third, since 1991, scholars lacked access to many of the archives where it was under the former Soviet Union. During the Cold War, Soviet officials would repress most of these discussions of the unique fate of Jews under Nazi rule. So Soviet anti-Semitism guaranteed that the archives of Ukraine remained closed and the Soviet Union collapsed. So since the collapse of the Soviet Union, you have more access to a lot of the archives and what happened. Also, as I mentioned, the killing sites in Ukraine are practically undetectable, right? They're ravines that have been filled in. Whereas like Auschwitz-Birkenau still has architectural design elements that you can easily go and you can visit and see, and you can pray there, and they're recognizable around the world. Sadly, though, many of the Jewish victims that were murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust by bullets they're still invisible. According to this particular database in Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Israel, about 50% of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust by bullets still need to be identified. Isn't that something? I mean, their history has sort of swallowed them alive. The campaign of mass shootings preceded the Nazis' full-scale use of extermination camps, these gas chambers, Auschwitz, Treblinka, Belzec, and both methods were part of the final solution, but keep in mind that this is the first stage of the Holocaust before they really get things moving from 1942 to 1940, all the way up to the beginning of 1945. So, I'm going to skip that slide because it's saying the same thing basically. I want to talk just a little bit about this. This psychological strain of shooting people day after day took a toll on the SS. After all, we are human beings, and to see that much bloodshed and death in front of you, it takes a toll. They knew if they disobeyed orders, they themselves would be shot. So what do? Is they, numb themselves through drink. They take snapshots of themselves like they were hunters of their kill and relax. They received higher pay. They received safety from the front lines in the war. They also extended home leave. So they got some sort of, quote, perks and benefits for this particular nasty job. So Himmler, he's no dummy. He knows a cleaner way, more efficient way, more impersonal way to distance his troops from this mass killing. And this is that kind of sinister evilness, the shrewdness of evil, of distancing themselves from evil. So we're going to get into concentration camps now. And we'll get a little bit in here, we'll take a break here. So there's a picture of the little ones there. And I'll talk just a little bit about this. This is the kind of sad thing with many of these children in these concentration camps. And I'm sure you've heard about Yosef Mengele, the kind of angel of death. And one of his very diabolical things that he'd do is he would experiment on twins, right? Because he would take them and he had sort of one as a sort of, here's the kind of baseline and here's what I do to the other one, right? So, and what can they handle? And then as soon as they die, he'd sort of compare the two with each other, inject them with stuff, and he'd just do these horrible things to these kids. No conscience whatsoever. So, if you sort of combine all the camps, this includes POW camps, transit camps, sort of sites of incarceration. There's lots of camps, right, all over sort of Europe. I mean, it depends how you count them, right, but it's in the thousands of camps. And they were, meant for enemies of the state, anybody who's a threat, sort of to the Third Reich. And so we're going to talk about, though, we're just going to talk about a few of these camps, these bigger camps, that are the most well-known. All of them are based on the model camp of Dachau. And they're not only an instrument of terror, but an important factor in war production. So, as more and more troops are being conscripted into the army, they're realizing we need some labor, we need some manpower here, right, and to help us with some of the raw materials needed for the war. So they start employing, if you a better word, using Jewish people and these prisoners for the sake of war production, right? So for their own sort of war needs. Now, this is going to be the final solution. These new camps will be built in the east. Old ones are equipped with industrial capacity. These are going to be the huge machines to kill human beings by the millions. And the Nazis are going to utilize byproducts of the human beings, their clothing, their hair, the gold in their teeth, glasses. They're going to use it. They're going to take advantage of all this stuff, right, for themselves. So some categories of camps for you. First of all, the SS had kind of these big camps, right? So 25 main concentration camps during the Nazi era. Again, that Dachau was the first sort of main camp established in March of 1933. By the way, most priests went to Dachau, right? So there was, thousands of priests there. I think something like 3,000 priests. There were some in Auschwitz as well, but some priests went to Dachau. Then there's these little sub-camps, satellite camps, little daughter camps, and there were about 1,100 of those, primarily forced labor. Auschwitz alone had 40 sub-camps. And then there's camps that are just basically, there's hybrid camps that have both forced labor and extermination. And then there's some just extermination camps. They just went there to die. That's it. There was no labor there except for the Sonderkommando. So Auschwitz-Birkenau is a hybrid camp. Belzec, Helmo, Majdanek is an extermination camp. Sobibor, Treblinka is probably the biggest extermination camp in terms of just like alone. That's all. You went there within 2 hours. Every person was basically exterminated at Treblinka. So again, this euthanasia program kind of preceded this Aktion et Führer. It began in 1939. This was their euthanasia program where they would basically target people with disabilities, elderly, mental illness, and there was thousands and thousands of people that were taken out by this particular program. And then there was another program that was inside the concentration camp that also would target the sick, the weak, the elderly, and people that were unfit for labor. Also a kind of a euthanasia program as well. So just keep in mind that euthanasia that is trying to, come here in the United States is nothing new, right? This is a kind of a Nazi mentality, right? To get rid of people that it's, as they would say, life unworthy of life. So in other words, you're not worth living anymore. So they would get rid of them. The first Nazi camps were created to hold those deemed enemies or subversives. Initially, the population of these concentration camps were not usually Jews, but they were communists, socialists, Roma, the pejorative term for them is gypsies, the Sinti, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay men or same-sex attraction, asocial elements, alcoholics, criminals, people, anybody deemed sort of subhuman or unworthy, right, below us. Such camps differed from normal prisons because of the harsh conditions. They really had no legal norms, right? It was just rule of law. It was just, you were at the complete whim of the sort of commandant or the whim of the sort of SS person, right? If you've seen Schindler's List, there's a scene in there that's just really powerful. I think it's Helen, I think her name is. She's the sort of maid for Amann Gurth, and she's down in the wine cellar, and she's just beside herself. And Schindler comes down, and she says, she's just exasperated. And she says, I don't get it. It doesn't seem like there's any rules. They shoot one person for this, and then they shoot one person for that, and this person lives. We can't figure out the system. He said, that's the problem. There is no system, right? It's because there's no relationship, and it's just completely at their whim. You're trying to figure out the logic, and there is no logic. It's just complete passion, and it's just evil, right? That's there. Because they're at least trying to, how do I survive? Like, what do I say? What don't I say? What do I do? What don't I do? And that itself is psychological trauma. Like, you can't figure out the rules of the game. You pull out the chessboard. How do the pieces move? Type of thing. So, but he says, when Amann Gurth shoots somebody because it doesn't mean anything to him, but she does mean something to him, right? So he does keep her alive, right? He does care about her very, very much. If you haven't seen Schindler's List, it's a must-see without question. It's a masterpiece without question. Essentially, the concentration camp became a space disconnected from the outside world. Justice was meted out at the whims of the commandant, much or these individual camp guards. So there's really no checks and balances for civil and humane sort of prisoner treatment. It's all gone in this particular. I mean, this is just an antechamber to hell in some sense. By the way, this is a kind of a little birdwalk here, but I remember listening to a little talk on like angels and demons. In heaven, there's orders of angels. There's seraphim, cherubim, principalities, dominions, guardian angels, archangels, angels. There's an order there, and they all respect each other, and they all love each other, and they carry out God's command with called alacrity, which is quickly, with joy, and they love God, and there's delight in that. You flip that in hell, higher angels beat the heck out of the lower angels, and there's self-hatred of the angels themselves, and they love to beat on each other, and there's no rules. They just beat on each other, and there's just noise, there's just grinding of teeth, and there's just hatred everywhere. And the only reason they coordinate at all is for their own self-interest that's there. And so I always thought about that, like, what the heck, right? So think of the beauty of heaven and take all that away, and you get the nastiness and ugliness of hell. And so you have a foretaste of that in these camps of what this is like. Individual camps rarely fit a distinctive categorization, but many concentration camps included elements of forced labor. Millions of people from across Europe are deported and forced to work under horrific conditions, and they called it annihilation through work. In other words, we're just going to work you to death, right? And actually what Reinhard Heydrich would say, it's just natural selection. We're going to annihilate you through work. So he states in the Wannsee Conference that this, again, is just going to be this natural reduction. Again, it's a euphemism, right, for basically we're going to kill you through labor. Additionally, as I mentioned, the war effort intensifies. We have a manpower shortage, so they're going to use this labor for their own benefit. Quarrying granite, construction, arms production. Many of these particular firms are going to benefit off this as well. So basically, by the way, I think the average lifespan in Auschwitz was 3 months, right? So that's it. I mean, it's just a horrific conditions. You got disease, you got starvation. Unfortunately, many times the Jewish prisoners would turn on each other as well, right, over food. I mean, they treated them like animals, and you end up having this kind of animalistic sort of horribleness that comes out. Again, you have the inhumane conditions that's there, 12-hour work days, little no rest, poor sanitation, severe malnutrition, disease. You can only imagine the sort of working condition, abuse, the psychological trauma all the time. They would dehumanize them, right? Of course, we all know the numbers. They would strip them of their identities and then give them numbers. You're now known as a number. This Arbeit macht frei, which is this kind of sinister work makes you free. The very famous sort of iron gate that's there, hung over the camp entrances. Death rates are extremely high. Obviously, you can imagine many of them died within a short amount of time. Historians estimate that in addition to the millions that were murdered in the death camps, hundreds of thousands of registered prisoners. This morning I had a Freudian slip. I said parishioners. I apologize for that. Prisoners died within concentration camp system itself. By the end of the war, approximately 12 million had been forced into labor for the German war economy. A couple more slides, we'll take a break. So there's a image of the makeshift sort of train station depot there by Treblinka. So these Nazi death camps, they were extermination centers. These were facilities that Nazi Germany used during the Holocaust for literally this systematic mass murder of these various different people, Roma, Soviet prisoners of war, and of course the Jewish people. Very efficient industrial scale killing, and we have Auschwitz, the famous scene there. I'm going to go past that slide there. So Majdanek and Auschwitz had often been referred to as hybrid camps. So you have both forced labor and you have the crematoria there as well. So it's the dual purposes in these particular systems. Again, in this experimental camp called Helmo, there was a lot of experimentation of how do we kill people as efficiently as possible in that particular camp. When speaking of death camps, the Nazis had 3 camps designed solely for extermination. Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. If you went there, there's no selection process, right? You just got them on the train, you get them out of the train, and you just, within a couple hours, they killed them. There's no Ramside selections. There's no young and healthy workers. Everybody who arrives goes straight to the death, except for the Sonderkommando. These 3 camps are often sometimes called this Aktion Reinhard Heydrich in honor of Reinhard Heydrich, who was killed, right? So he's the architect of this whole thing. So these are the camps that were built after the Wannsee Conference on January 20th, 1942. To give you an idea of numbers, at these 3 camps, 1.7 million people, mainly Jews, were murdered in a year and a half. Like, oh my gosh. Treblinka, over half of this number perished at Treblinka alone. It's a horrific stat that is often led to being classified as the deadliest space of the Third Reich. There's an estimated between 800,000 and 974,000 people were murdered at Treblinka alone. Almost all of them Jews. Virtually 100% of those deported to Treblinka were murdered. Most victims were murdered within 2 hours of their arrival. I have a slide here of numbers. These are all estimates. Auschwitz is the biggest of them all, 1.1 million, using Zyklon B. Treblinka is second, 925,000. Belzec, 435,000. Sobibor, 167,000. Helmo, 152,000. Majdanek, 58,000. You can see a lot of carbon monoxide there. Some use gas fans. Majdanek used Zyklon B. Those are staggering numbers. Each of them is a human being. Now, the few hundred to 1,000 prisoners that were kept alive at any one time were forced to perform tasks such as sorting the victims' belongings, burying and later burning the bodies, and running the unloading areas. These groups, so for example, the very, very small percentage that were kept alive to do the dirty work, they themselves were liquidated and then replaced with new arrivals so that no witnesses survived. The systematic efficiency of the camp meant that the death rate was as close to total as possible. So that subgroup is called the Sonderkommando, which is a special command. And these guys, again, is the dirtiest of the dirtiest of the dirtiest work. They're the ones running the machinery. They're the ones doing the gas chambers. They're the ones handling the dead bodies and taking all the belongings and everything else. And we'll talk a little bit more about them. I think that's an important quote there. This is all very demonic. Now the serpent was the most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord God had made. Don't ever shortchange the evil one, right? And so I'm going to show you a couple slides here. These are kind of the gem of this particular presentation. Is I want you to see the deceit. And remember that Jesus himself refers to the evil one as the father of lies. And this is his main way of operating is he works through deceit and lies. So Nazi deceit, the Nazis use elaborate and systematic deception tactics to mislead victims about their impending murder in death camps, most notably by disguising the gas chambers as shower rooms. So they would have these fake shower heads that would come down so that they literally thought they were going in there to take a shower. And sometimes, in a very cavalier way, they would say, hurry, hurry, get in there. The water's getting cold. You want to catch it before it gets cold. Or they would design the outside like a shower room, or they design it like a hotel, or they would design it like a train station, or look like, oh, this is just a temporary stop that's here. And they put flowers out front and everything to make everything look just really lovely. And the idea here is you want to try to quell panic as much as possible. You want them to dupe them until they get in there, until the very last second they realize what the heck's going on here. False promises upon arriving at camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. Victims often, they're just exhausted. They're confused. Where are we? They were being told that they're being resettled for work and would first need to undergo, we just need to disinfect you. And we need to bathe you for hygiene reasons. And they would even say things like, we're very sorry for the inconvenience. We're going to make things better for you to prevent the spread of diseases like typhus. So they're taking their clothes off. They're thinking they're going to just literally take a shower. They would also have this deceptive architecture. The killing rooms are often constructed to resemble large community bathhouses. As I mentioned, they were labeled the showers, bathhouses, with non-functional shower heads and water pipes on the ceiling to maintain the illusion. They'd also use psychological manipulation. The SS guards and camp personnel were instructed to act normal, just act as normal as possible, sometimes even making small talk and telling the victims, now remember where you left your clothes, because you're going to need to get them back. And we're going to get you, and then even sometimes they have them write postcards, to their family members and stuff, like, don't worry, tell them you'll be back with your family soon, right? And so they do all these things to lie to them, to get them to think that, that everything is just fine. They would also use elaborate fake stations at extermination camps like Treblinka. Fake railway stations were constructed complete with a clock and ticket window to maintain the illusion of a normal transit stop. Also, to quell the conscience, they would use euphemisms. The Nazis used a range of euphemistic language to disguise their actions from their victims, the German public and the outside world, like final solution, evacuation, processing, resettlement, right? They would use these things to mask what they're really doing. So realize that evil uses words in a very, very different way. Horrific evil. In reality, once the victims were sealed in, the doors were locked and poison gas, typically Zyklon B at camps like Auschwitz, or carbon monoxide at like Treblinka, were introduced through special little openings in the top, killing everyone inside within minutes. The bodies were then quickly processed in a nearby crematoria and buried in mass graves to hide the evidence. And by the way, so the Jews, by and large, had to do all the dirty work, but for whatever reason, it was always an SS guard who would climb up the ladder and drop in the poisonous gas. They were always the ones who did that. Now, there were some revolts in these particular camps. 2 of the 3 Reinhard camps, Treblinka and Sobibor, they had revolts in 1943, and God bless the Jewish people for revolting. That's actually quite heroic. Jewish fighters fought back, destroyed portions of the camps, and escaped into the nearby woods. In fact, about 150 of these people survived these revolts to tell you what happened at these particular camps. And their stories are absolutely critical for the inside workings of what happened in these particular camps. But there was another camp called Belzec where basically nobody survived. There were usually 2 known survivors out of a death toll as high as 500,000 Jews. There's no rebellion at Belzec. So there's a very famous Arbeit macht frei, which makes you free there, the gates going into Auschwitz. By the way, I told the folks this morning, the Lord's kind of putting in my heart, we're doing Greece in September. I'm going to talk to Magi. I would like, if possible, to do a pilgrimage to Poland because not only John Paul is there, but I really do want to go. I've never been there. I want to go to the concentration camps, offer my prayers, my love, and my gratitude for these people. Like I told the Jewish gentleman, I said, I don't know what it is. I just love the Jewish people so much. There's just something about them. I just respect them very much. And he said, we appreciate that, Father. We've been through a lot, right, in our history. Auschwitz also had a revolt. The Sonderkommando blew up one of the crematoria, killed, wounded several SS members. Though nearly all participated in the uprising were killed, they're really kind of a testament to courage in the face of annihilation. So just a couple more slides before we take a little break here. So Auschwitz, the big one of them all, the symbol of this sort of whole system, had 40 sort of sub-camps to it. And I just want you to realize that Auschwitz had really 3 camps. I think most people maybe don't know this. So Camp 1 is the main camp, established in April 1940. This was the headquarters, the administrative headquarters. And it was a concentration camp for Polish political prisoners, Soviet POWs, and others. It was really a place for brutal forced labor. Severe punishment, Block 11 is there, the bunker, the smaller scale gassing. So this isn't the death camp. This is mostly a forced labor camp, is Auschwitz I, the main camp. The one that we normally think of as Auschwitz-Birkenau is the extermination camp. That's Auschwitz II, number 2. That construction began in 1941, located 2 miles from Auschwitz I. This camp specifically was designed for the final, they built this camp for death. This is for the systematic genocide of the Jewish people. This has those gas chambers. It has the Zyklon B. It has the crematoria. This has labor prisoners as well, but its primary purpose for existing is for extermination. So when we think of Auschwitz, it's Birkenau is the one we typically, that's the death camp. Auschwitz III, labor camp, established in 1942, forced labor also where prisoners worked in this nearby IG Farben, a synthetic rubber and fuel factory. Now, the central, Auschwitz, because of where it's sat, it's on this main sort of, railway line that's there. So it has this capacity of receiving lots and lots of prisoners. And as we've said multiple times, we have over 1 million people that died in this particular camp. Rudolf, it's pronounced, I think it's Hirsch. Rudolf Hirsch was the commandant, and he was a Catholic, actually, and his family was pretty devout Catholic. Clearly, he fell away and really joined a different religion, the Third Reich, the Nazi regime. And he was tried at Nuremberg, and by some grace of God, in the midst of his trial, he had kind of a scales falling from his eyes of the great horrific evil that he participated in. And he realized, I have done horrific, horrific things. And so he remembered his baptism, and he remembered that he was Catholic. And so before he was put to death, and they actually put him to death in Auschwitz, they brought him back there to hang him there, he actually asked for a priest and said, I'd like to see a priest. And he asked for a specific priest. He said, I'd like to see a priest that came to Auschwitz. I think he was a Jesuit, that impressed me, actually. And this priest wanted to see his brother priests on the inside of the camp. He wanted to be with them. And I told him to get lost. But there was something about that priest that was sort of like beautiful, and there was a kind of a gravitas about that priest. Could you find that priest? So they did. I mean, they looked and scoured Poland to find this particular priest. He gave him the name. He remembered the name. And they finally found this priest after a couple of days. And by divine providence, the place where they found him he was in the chapel of Divine Mercy, where the priest was praying. And they said, there is a gentleman, part of the Third Reich, the commandant of Auschwitz, who's going to be put to death, but he wants to make a confession. Would you be willing to hear his confession? And God blessed the priest. He said, who am I to hold back God's mercy? So he went and heard his confession. And can you imagine that? I can't even imagine. That's extreme mercy to the end. My mind can't even get around that, right? Made that confession, and then he was put to death. I think it was about a week later that's there. I know sometimes we struggle with that, like to say, God. But they say God's mercy, if one is truly repentive, who am I to place limits on God's mercy? That's there, right? To my knowledge, you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong in this, of the number of Nazi officials that were put to death at Nuremberg, something like 40-something, only 2 were repentive, like actually repentant. Most of them were just hard as rock steel. Heil Hitler, they would just say, I didn't do anything wrong. Right to the gallows, just stone cold, I didn't do anything wrong. But there was only 2 that had kind of a religious conversion afterward. That tells you something about evil. And it tells you something about the hardness of the heart, a kind of a Pharaoh-like syndrome. The heart gets harder and harder and harder, and it gets harder and harder to convert. Now, this dual function, this camp complex uniquely combined the functions of a concentration camp We have forced labor and extermination. By the way, when it was liberated by the Soviets in 1945, they basically had this death march of 60,000 prisoners where a good chunk of them died. They left something like 7,000 prisoners because well, they're just too weak and going to die anyway. Just leave them there. So when they got there on January 27th, by the way, this is like the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. This is where they find them very emaciated and just, you have these images of these prisoners that were left. They just kind of left them for dead. There's a very kind of, this is a place I really want to go, right? I really want to go there and pay my respects. And I feel like it's on my bucket list. I really want to get there. How many of you have been to Auschwitz? A few of you? It's sobering, isn't it? I can only imagine. It's very sobering. Okay, this is a great spot. So what we're going to talk about when we come back, I'm going to give you a little 10-minute break here. 8 o'clock we'll return. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the camera from a wide lens. We're going to do a little zoom, and I want you to feel the feelings of the Jewish people and what they went through. So we're going to go what it was like to be sort of extricated, to take it out of your ghetto, to put on the cattle car, to go through the selection process, and then to go to the gas changers or the forced labor. And I want you to go through. I want you to really feel what this is like for them. So we're going to actually go the road to extermination here, and then we're going to go through Maximilian Kolbe, Edith Stein, and then if we can get to it, we'll do Pope Pius XII. Okay? You've been doing great. You've been hanging in there with you. So we're going to make it through this. Okay? So 10-minute break. Sound good? Okay.
Okay, we're at 8 o'clock here, so let's, we don't be here all night. All right, as you make your way back to the seats here, we're going to actually just take kind of a tour, if you will, or just kind of get in the shoes and the hearts of what it's like to be forced and deported from the ghetto and then all the way to the concentration camps. So first of all, there are 2.5 million people in the Jewish ghettos. Rations are small and people are starving. This is not a good place to be. It's not unusual to see after a while, because of starvation, malnutrition, disease, there'll be corpses just lying in the streets. And as the clothes of dead bodies were often taken by others, there was a morning round of death carts that came to pick up bodies as well. Barbara, I think you're right over there. The Nazi Germans lowered rations still further. Given the living conditions, there was no shortage of volunteers for resettlement. They're like, okay, wherever we go, and it can't be as bad as this. So in the midst of those ghettos, they gave them a little bit of food, they gave them a little bit of drink. In fact, sometimes people would actually pay for their own way to get out of the ghetto, right? Say, I'll pay the fare wherever we're going. If you're going to resettle this, it's got to be better than this. Camp leaders prepared lists of names that the Germans would require, usually about 1,000. If anybody was missing off those lists, they would round up an extra 50 people and then shove them onto the transport for resettlement. These cars, these cattle cars, if you will, these train cars, were pretty horrific. I mean, there's people that died on the way. They walked to the station where the cattle cars are waiting. The Nazis would close the bolt, and then they would stuff them in there so tight, right, that they would basically be suffocating, right? They cram them in there just like sardines. And one person said it was basically a hell on wheels. After 24 hours, they don't have enough food, they don't have enough drink, they don't have water. They gave them one bucket for using the restroom, and they were not allowed to empty that bucket either. Naturally, you can imagine that the weak would start to faint first, and they would start to die first, the elderly, children, women. Transports could carry anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 prisoners at a single time, and some of them had even more. Now, to give you the idea of the Nazi mentality, here's what Adolf Eichmann said. The trains ran like a dream for him, right? They ran on time. Another quote I found here, through the steam, I saw a sign, Auschwitz. I didn't know what it was, but a minute later, I found out. So arriving at Auschwitz-Birkenau, there, they said, first of all, this is a very strange place. They've obviously never been there. But first of all, they see these people in these like pajama-like clothing. Like, what in the world are they dressed like that for? The wagon was open, and there was this kind of gust of fresh air. They're just sort of relieved to get out of this car. And what they start doing is they start throwing out the dead bodies because people died on the way. And they would just start, now the idea here is you want this to happen. You want no panic, but you want things to happen as quickly as possible, right? You want them to lollygag. So they would say, Jude, schnell, 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 aus, 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 quick, 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 out, 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 come on. And if you've seen, again, Schindler's List, it does a pretty darn good job of the feeling at Auschwitz in these places of when they get out of these cars, right? They have dogs barking like crazy. They're kind of yelling at them and saying, get over here. They could also, at times, see flames going up from a chimney. Now, they don't know what that is, but they could smell this awful, awful smell. What is that smell, right? And I watched a video maybe a year ago, 6 months ago, where in California, this funeral parlor was doing very nefarious things, and they were just burning tons of bodies to make a lot of money, right? And they were just combining all the ashes. And somebody who was at Auschwitz called the authorities and said, I know that smell. I know that smell. Something is not right happening in that particular place. You need to go there and figure out what is going on in there. You get in there. And they went in there and they saw just tons, totally done inappropriately, right? And of course the loved ones are just horrified that you treat our loved ones like this. But that person smelt that smell. And they said, I will never forget that smell in my life, right? And I was in Auschwitz. I know what that smells like. And there's something not right happening in that particular funeral home. In some sense, Jewish prisoners could smell Auschwitz before they saw it. Now, it's almost impossible to emphasize how cavalier the Nazis were. So, for example, they would say things like, don't worry about your property, we'll take care of it for you. We'll restore the sanitary conditions that you experienced. We're very sorry for the inconvenience that you've had, you know. So they would always do this with, in their minds, a little bit of humor. The Nazis, it was not a question of gentle technique or brutal technique, but rather efficiency. People were to enter the gas chamber as soon as possible, right, without a hitch. So Jewish prisoners, those selected, there were some Jewish prisoners that were at the Sonderkommando, they were at the receiving process of this, right? So some of them had a job of a baggage squad, right? So their job is to take the bags and to sort everything. So I understand if you're at Auschwitz, you can see like the luggage, you can see the glasses, you can see, you know, the different, the clothing of that nature. They had to clean everything up so that every single time transport came in, they would clean everything up to make it look spotless, as if nothing happened, right? Nothing happened. So that next transport coming in just thinks, oh, okay, this is good. We're just going to be resettled here. The new arrivals came in 1 or 2 hour intervals. They came at spot clean transport all the time. They had no clue at the place what they were coming to. Between 1941 and December 1944, it was an average of 1.5 trains, but in 1945, I mean, in 1944, when the Hungarian Jews came in, there was just a ton. This number went way up. So I got a couple pictures here of receiving lines to get this idea of this. So you've all heard this before, right? So there's a kind of the Nazi doctors that are there, and they would inspect people if you were healthy and take a look at you. So basically left, right, right? So one was immediate death, and then one was going to be in the forced labor camps. There's one picture there for you, and then here's another one. You see the pajamas there, the prison uniforms there that they had. So they're separating. I mean, this is just heartbreaking for me. You see like this woman with her little child right there. She has zero chance of making it, right? If you have a child, there's just no way. Some did, though, sense that something's not right. The sick, the old, lame, pregnant women, mothers, and small children were sent to the left, gassed immediately. Most had no idea what was going to happen. I got this quote from The World at War. I watched a little video on the Holocaust. One woman complained, "Sir, this man says that my children will be gassed. Madame, do you think we are barbarians?" So, I mean, they just had this kind of attitude towards them. Those to be gassed were told that they would be deloused before starting work. Then they would rejoin their families. So these selections, when they would get to these camps, these doctors would deem those able to work, would register them. At Auschwitz, they would tattoo them, right? Shave their hair. Anything that kind of personal identity that had unique characteristics would be wiped away from you. Your name, hair, clothing, anything distinctive of you would be taken away from you. SS doctors would line up Jews, again, in 2 separate lines, and then those deemed unfit for work would be gassed immediately. One arrival asked, "What is this place?" A gentleman started laughing. "You have come to the heaven, Commander." And then he pointed to the far distance of smoke rising. "There is a chimney. You will go out that chimney." So those deemed for the gas chambers, they would put them onto a lorry or a truck that waited outside to take those selected for the gas chamber. And they said that when this thing started up, it was a bit like a death cry. They were told that they would be taken out in the woods and they're going to be deloused and they're going to be given a shower. Now here's the thing, it's really another sinister thing. The truck that had the gas in it, the Zyklon B, which is a pesticide, it was put in a truck with an ambulance or a Red Cross on the outside to make it look like it was an ambulance.
I'm going to explain that picture in a second. The SS forced the Jews to get undressed. So this is about maybe 20 yards outside of the gas chamber. Would order them and prepare them for disinfection. I mean, they still have no idea. They think they're going to take a shower. Now, there's big piles of clothing there. The new arrivals had to stand on a big heap of clothes and get undressed. And oftentimes, the children, these poor children, are hiding underneath the clothes, right, to try to get away or they're scared, right? They're children. Now, here's the thing is, after this is going on for a while, some of the Jews are like, how can the world not know this? And this is insane. We have to get a camera in here, a hidden camera, a little tiny camera, sneak it in here, take some pictures, and then sneak it back out so the world could see what's going on. So they were actually able to do that. And so they snuck a camera in, and I think it was like a little toothpaste tube. And God bless them, they then took a couple of pictures, and these are very, very famous pictures, like underneath the coat or through a buttonhole, just to take a little snapshot as quick as they could and then hide the camera. So there's very, very few pictures from the time of inside of Auschwitz. And you can imagine, right? They don't want to take pictures of what's happening here. There's something like only 7 pictures that they got and then snuck out. I've got 3 of them here for you. This is one of them. It's a grainy picture. And what this is you can see it's crooked because he has to take it really quick, right? You don't want to be caught. Obviously, you're dead if you caught with that picture. And you can see them. There's the undressing that's happening. And you see these women that are now walking towards the gas chambers. That's there. There's another picture they took that was too high. You can only see trees. But this is the best one of that particular bunch. I'm going to show you a couple more pictures where they were able to take it from a little, kind of like a little shack or the crematoria of all the bodies on the ground. Because when the crematoria were overwhelmed with the people, they would just take the bodies out back and throw them into a pit. So there's a couple pictures of those as well that are very famous. I think these pictures are critical. Right there in your face. This is what happened. So what they would do is they would say, shall get ready. The Jews would either run or walk, to the bunker about 20 yards. There would be 2 doors waiting there open where they would enter. A certain number of Jews they would put in there. The SS would then shut the doors. About 2,000 to 2,500 people could be put in a gas chamber at a time. That's a lot of people, right, could be put in at one time. The SS then found the children hiding under the clothes. They would grab them, and this is the thing that's just horrific it's a horror on top of horror. They would throw the children on top of the people in the gas chamber, right, because they're all squished in there. And they said many times this is when all the screaming would start, because they would realize this isn't a shower, right? This is going to be horrific. So these poor children, this is horrific to even think about this. So the inside got a picture of a gas chamber you can see, and just kind of how horrific this is. Now the Zyklon B, again, is transporting these vans are disguised as ambulances. The Zyklon B is the commercial name for a highly poisonous and cyanide-based fumigation product whose active ingredient is hydrogen cyanide. It was originally developed as a pesticide. Remember that they referred to the Jewish people as rats or vermins. So the irony of our ironies is they're using a pesticide to kill them. And of course, it's infamous here for Auschwitz-Birkenau during the Holocaust, these tin cans. So what they do is after throwing the children in, there's this great panic and this terrible scream, and then they realize at this point that they're going to be killed. An SS soldier then would climb the ladder, take out a tin of Zyklon B, open the little iron door on top of the gas chamber, shake the tin into the hole, and then shut the door. There would be a fearful, and this is to put it lightly, screaming that would start up, which is just heartbreaking for about 10 to 15 minutes. People would, would scratch each other, hit each other. They're doing whatever they can to survive. And then slowly, everything would go quiet. And then they said, like, I don't know if they got used to this or what, this awful screaming, this death right in front of them. They said there were cries in the gas chamber, cries from the bunker, cries in the crematorium, cries to the sky. Then what would happen is the SS, they would look into this little hole to see if there's any movement. Are they all dead? And then a doctor present would give the okay, and they would open the door, and then there'd be this blue haze that would come up, billowing out of the gas chamber, and they'd use like sometimes a fan to get all of the poison out. And sometimes they would look in and they would say it was not unusual to see a pyramid of dead people all tangled up, going up to the opening of the particular, trying to get out, right? Climbing on top of each other. So the Sonderkommando would have to come in there and literally untangle all of these dead bodies, right? This is just hell, right? This is just hell, dirty work. This, to me, is the most troubling slide of all. A gentleman watching the whole process, he's just horrified. And he asked the driver of the ambulance, responsible for carrying the Zyklon B, how can you stand it? The driver replied, you do get used to anything in time. Human nature. This is just sick. So what they would do then is they would take these bodies up to these ovens, and before they put them in the ovens, they would lay the bodies on the floor, and they would search for all the valuables, right? If any valuables, teeth, they look at their teeth. They would shave the women's hair, because the hair was used for like in socks and mattresses for the German people and for soldiers on the front. They'd sometimes look, I hate to say this, in intimate places and stuff. It'd take about 15 minutes to burn each body when there was only a few ashes left. This is unfathomable. There, right, there's the ovens there. Now, the tattoos, those selected to work for gassing, lasted, to work before they were gassed, they got a 3-month average lifespan in Auschwitz. They were made to undress, take a shower, a real shower in this case. They were deloused, their heads were shaven, and numbers were tattooed on their arms. By the way, this was not all the concentration camps, mostly just at Auschwitz, where they'd tattoo your arm. And you were no longer a name, you were now always referred to as that particular number. Men and women in the forced labor were given uniforms. They had about 100,000 slave laborers at Auschwitz. Poles and Jews worked until they died. They were crammed about 300 to a block. They're just jammed in there like sardines. Very, very just minimal food to survive. Oftentimes, there would, as you can imagine, there would be fights among them. They would kill each other. I mean, it wasn't always pretty amongst the Jewish people. The idea here was annihilation through work. That's the policy, that we're going to intentionally have brutal conditions now that's going to lead to your inflicted most pain possible, injury, and death. And if you became too weak to work, then you were gassed. Prisoners slept 4 or more to a bunk in huts that were originally designed for horses, and I have a picture there. You can see this is one for women that's here. So work is not organized in terms of just obviously comfort, but for productivity and to inflict the greatest amount of suffering on workers as possible. In the heavy labor camps, prisoners were dead after a few days of heavy labor and heavy beatings. Some couldn't take it, right? This is horrendous. They would actually run into the electric barbed wire fence to kill themselves. And there's pictures, I didn't put them up there for your sake, but there's prisoners that were just kill themselves, right? Or they would say, just put me on the roll for the gas chamber. I don't want to live anymore. I can't handle it. This is the part I'm sparing you from because it's so horrific. I don't even think it's worth public sort of, you can look at it in your own time. But some of the experiments that some of these doctors performed on some of these prisoners is just unthinkable. Himmler told his doctors, like, you're not inhibited anymore by Christian prejudices. There's the dignity of the human person, that's a bunch of garbage. These are vermin. These are animals. You can do whatever you want to them. And we can use them to exploit to further science, right? And to learn for our own race what we can do. They would test them, like high altitude flying. Some Jews are put in a simulator. High forces, some were starved of oxygen, some were put in freezing water, their limbs were cut off, to see what they could take without anesthesia. They do this on men, women, children. The kind of the beast of all beasts, the angel of death, was Josef Mengele. November 1943, he becomes the chief physician of Auschwitz. He's probably the most well-known of the kind of nasty doctors. This man was, I'm going to use the word crazy, but just diabolically evil. He would find twins. He was very interested in twins. And anytime he heard of twins, he'd have them send them to him. He'd treat them well at first, give them candy, treat them well, and then he would start his experiments on them little by little and collecting. And really, my understanding is how sick this is, they didn't gain any knowledge out of this, right? They didn't actually further any sort of medical research from all the things they did. And who cares if they did or not? What you're doing is awful. There's a picture of Josef Mengele there in the middle. That's there. By the way, if you're like, what happened to that guy? Somehow, this guy, after the war, escaped, right? He got his passports and everything, and he made his way down to Argentina. And then he went to, I think it was Paraguay. And my understanding, he got more and more cynical and more jaded. He had a son, and that son actually, you can see the interview of Josef Mengele's son on 60 Minutes. They actually interviewed him. This poor guy, he's a lawyer. He's thoroughly embarrassed about his dad. I mean, he just wants some distance from his dad. But he did meet his dad a few times, right? Because his dad really wanted to meet his son, because they were separated. And he said in the 60 Minutes interview, I didn't bring it up right away, right? I wanted to, kind of small talk for a little bit. But eventually he did bring it up. He's like, Dad, how could you do this? And he said, his dad just lost it. Like, he just lost his gasket. How could you bring that up, type of thing. No sense of repentance whatsoever. None. He died in 1979, never caught. Had a stroke when he was swimming. But as you and I know, if you don't have the tribunal in this life, there's a tribunal in another life that you're going to have to answer for there. So we'll have to commend him to the very mercy of God. Evil has a sort of logic that you would think that it would just, when it realizes it's going to lose, that it would just back down, but it doesn't. Actually, what evil does is it ramps up its sort of intensity and depth when it knows it's going to lose. So in 1944, the Germans really going to realize that we are losing the war. Therefore, the SS speeded up the killing. They started having the tracks go right to the gas chambers. So they're trying to get as many Jews as they can. And the one that got hit the hardest was the Hungarian Jews, was the last large Jewish community. And this is a really, really sad tale on sort of European society, how Hungary basically knew that we're going to give these people up to death, that they handed these people over to the Nazis in March of 1944. There's 440,000 Jews from Hungary that were handed over and sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the killing center. Of that 440,000, 75% were sent directly to the gas chambers. So that is a very sad commentary. The remaining roughly 100,000 were sent to the labor camps. And by the way, this is another sinister thing that the Nazis did, is they wouldn't have the gas chambers out in the open. They would build them into the woods, and they'd put trees in front of them, right? So you couldn't even see these things. So they were just, that you would, again, to alleviate any panic of incoming prisoners. Just a little bit about this Sonderkommando. I don't know why I'm sort of fascinated, and my heart breaks for these prisoners, these Jewish prisoners. Some were selected for this kind of special command. Their job was the daily dirty work of the camp, primarily around the gas chambers and the handling of the dead bodies. The work, as you can imagine, is physically taxing, psychologically horrific, and of course you're like, well, I'm not going to do that. Well, obviously you're going to die, if they put you to death if you weren't willing to do it. So some of their jobs is they were on the receiving line, right, to make sure everything's staying calm. They had to lie all the time, as they get to the gas chambers. They had to go into the gas chambers to untangle the bodies and to move them up to the ovens. They had to collect all the valuables off the dead bodies. They also had to dispose of the dead bodies as well. They had to clean up the scene to make sure that each new transport was clean. They also had to destroy the evidence as well. And sometimes, in the beginning, they would sort of build these big pits and then bury these bodies. And then the Nazis are like, well, that's not good. They could be dug up. So they'd have them dig up the grave, dig up the dead body, and then burn them. So as if that's not bad enough, right? They'd make them do, can you imagine that? Having to dig these graves and finding dead bodies in them. So these are two famous pictures here. Again, that secret camera that was brought in. This is from a Hungarian Jew serving as a Sonderkommando. He's being interviewed. Again, if you haven't seen this, World at War is a phenomenal documentary. There's 2 episodes on the Holocaust that are just priceless because they interview these guys that actually were there and did the dirty work. I mean, this is back in the day. They're like, as they're being interviewed, they're smoking. You're like, okay, this is clearly like the 70s, right? So they're all smoking. They're telling you just kind of point blank what they had to do. And so this Hungarian Jew is telling, he's like, okay, I got off the train, and they said, okay, you come with me. And then they took me behind. He's like, I don't know where I was going. And he's like, I came behind this building, and then I could not believe what I saw. Like it was hell on earth. He said there were large piles of dead people. There were people dragging them into a pit 30 meters in length and 30 meters in width. There was a huge fire there with trees. He said they were taking the fat from the dead corpses and taking them out of the pit with a bucket. So there is one of those pictures that was taken through kind of a secret, like a little coat sort of buttonhole, and you can see them dragging a very grainy picture there into this pit that's burning. Another picture, there's a very famous picture here of the guy kind of with the arms right there. So he says, when I got there, I was like, oh my gosh. So he starts taking, grabbing the body, and they're like, no, this is how you do it. You take a walking stick, you put it under the chin, and you drag the body to the pit like a rag or a piece of wood, right? So they're telling him how to be most efficient in doing this. The prisoners then would throw the bodies into the pit, and he said there was just many who just it was so horrific that they would just jump into the pit. They would just jump into the fire themselves. Like I can't take it, right? This is awful. There was 2 shifts of this, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Could you imagine? That is your job all day long. Every person, without exception, is capable of doing the worst thing, to live just another minute. What are the byproducts? The Germans, the Nazis, the hair. You've seen pictures, I'm sure, of just the sheer amount of hair that was discovered by the Soviets when they discovered Auschwitz. They would ship that hair for socks, mattresses. They would take the ashes and they would use it as fertilizer. Scatter it in nearby fields, cabbage fields, dump it into rivers. They would take the gold teeth and they'd melt it down and they'd put it into their bank accounts. Human soap. There's evidence that the Jewish victims produced 10 to 100 kilograms of soap from corpses from washing autopsy rooms. Of course, eyeglasses, clothing, all baggage, valuables, all that stuff is collected as well. To show you the kind of thought of Himmler, as the Soviet army got closer, the Germans began to retreat. Himmler, however, urged the masterwork to carry on. He was told that 6 million Jews had been killed and that 4 million were in concentration camps and 2 million by shooting. And here's what his response was. Well, fantastic. Really, 6 million? Just imagine there must be more than that. So he just wants all of them, right? He says, set up the stats people to check upon it. So the Germans tried to destroy all the evidence by blowing up the gas chambers, the crematoriums when their sort of work is being exposed. The Russians liberate Auschwitz. It's the 80th anniversary this year, January 27th. They found about 7,000 people remaining alive. These were prisoners that were too old or sick to participate in death marches. These are basically living skeletons. They were living dead people. The SS forced about 60,000 prisoners to march westward. And it's something like 9,000 to 15,000 of those died in that particular death march. It's kind of a summary slide here of the number of folks that died in these things. The idea here, I'm telling you all this stuff, not to gross you out or leave you deflated, but the idea is we never want this to happen again, right? We want Auschwitz, never want to build another Auschwitz again. So I want to end on a kind of a high note here. Maximilian Kolbe is a kind of a sacrificial act of love and a witness to heroic love in the midst of his great darkness. He's a Polish Franciscan friar. He's a priest. He's known from a very young age having a very strong faith. And when the Nazis invaded Poland in his convent where he was, he provides refuge for thousands, and many of them Jews, to be in his monastery. But then he's arrested in 1941 by the Gestapo, and he's sent to Auschwitz, and his name is stripped, so to speak, and he's given the number 16670. So sometimes you'll see images of Maximilian Kolbe, and he's got the prisoner uniform over his habit there with his number there. In the St. Maximilian Kolbe Shrine in Chicago, which is really quite lovely, they have a beautiful statue of Kolbe with his habit, and draped over him is his Auschwitz uniform there. While in Auschwitz, he continued his priestly work. He comforts prisoners. He shares his food. He prays for them. And then there's this famous scene in 1941 where a prisoner or two escape. And this is a big no-no, right? I mean, we gotta deter any of this action. So anytime a prisoner escaped, they would select a certain number of prisoners to die because of this, as a consequence of this. So they selected 10 men, lined them up in front of everybody, and they said 10 are can be randomly selected, and we're going to put you into a starvation bunker, and we're just going to starve you to death. So one of the men there cries out, in front of everybody, I got a wife, I got a children, have mercy. And so Kolbe, who's not selected, steps forward and says, I will take the place of that man. I will take the place. And this rarely, if ever, happened at Auschwitz, right? And the SS officer is a little taken back by this and uses the kind of formula you. He says, why do you, sir, want to die for me? I mean, this doesn't happen, right? And Kolbe says, I'm a Catholic priest. I'm old. He has a wife and children. And then, there's various accounts of what he said, but he basically said good, and he let the man free, and then he put Kolbe in his place, which many times they just say, you're just going to join him, right? So this is a pretty kind of a divine little miracle here that this man's life is spared. And by the way, that man was at Kolbe's beatification, right? That he was able to live. That's pretty something. I'm very moved by this image. So this is an image that I found down at the shrine of St. Maximilian Kolbe. One of the prisoners sketched in one of the walls at Auschwitz the image of the Sacred Heart. So you see light shining in the darkness, even in these dark places. So Maximilian Kolbe and 9 others are locked in this underground bunker, and they know which one it is. There's actually, you can go there. This is one of the reasons I want to go to Auschwitz, is because there's an Easter candle, a Paschal candle there, a candle that's always lit. And John Paul II visited it and prayed in that particular cell where he was starved to death. He was the last one to remain alive. They sang hymns, he encouraged them, he prayed, and then eventually they came in, they injected him with, I think it was like carbolic acid or something like that. And then he dies on August 14th, 1941, on the eve of the Assumption. He had a real devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, St. Maximilian Kolbe. So I think it's by divine, God's permissive will that he dies in this way, but he dies on the feast day, in some sense, of the Blessed Virgin Mary. He's canonized, he's beatified in 1971 by Paul VI, and John Paul II canonized him, calls him a martyr of charity. He's one of the greatest saints of the 20th century. He's just a man that many, many people love, Maximilian Kolbe. He's just a beautiful, beautiful priest. He helped bring God's grace and a ray of light and hope to a dark and horrific place with his triumph of self-sacrificial love. So St. Maximilian Kolbe, there's a new movie, I'm sure you heard, called Triumph of the Heart. And it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for children. But I understand it just got undeformed. So we have a subscription that we pay for here at the parish. One of our parishioners is kind enough to pay for the subscription. So you could actually watch the movie for free. So it's on form, and I think it just got on there, called Triumph of the Heart, and it's about Maximilian Kolbe. I think that's worth your watching that to see that great love of Maximilian Kolbe. The other one I want to highlight is St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, or Edith Stein. She's born into a Jewish family in Germany. She initially became an atheist. She lost her Jewish faith, but then she's hungry for the truth. So she has this deep search for the truth. And somehow, by divine providence, she ends up within her hands St. Teresa of Avila's autobiography. And she reads through this, and she's very moved by this. And she says these famous words after reading this autobiography of St. Teresa of Avila: "This is the truth." So she's moved to convert to Catholicism. She becomes a philosopher, a professor, a very well-respected one. She earns a doctorate. She's bright. And she teaches at various institutions. In 1933, unable to continue under Nazi rule, because they started removing, of course, as we talked about, all the Jews from the sort of influential positions, she enters the Discalced Carmelites, in honor of St. Teresa of Avila, in Cologne, Germany. Then she takes the name Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. And to escape Nazi persecution, the sisters move her to the Netherlands. And there and her sister Rosa are eventually found out by the Nazis in 1942, and they are sent to Auschwitz. Her last words in the convent when they came to get her were, "Come, we're going for our people." So you see here, it didn't matter if you were baptized, if you said you were Catholic. For the Nazis, it's about the blood. So if you're born a Jew, you're always a Jew, right? So she could say, "I'm not we know that you don't cease becoming a Jew. I mean, that's just not how it works. We would just say you're a Jew in the full covenant of Jesus Christ." So St. Teresa helped provide a peaceful, prayerful presence along the way. There were many mothers on the long way who were just traumatized. They couldn't care for their children because they were shocked, so she'd be this mother to them and take care of these children. On the way, she was put to death at Auschwitz in the gas chamber on August 9th, 1942. She was canonized by John Paul II in 1998. Here's a little quote from her: "For by doing what God demands of us with total surrender of our innermost being, we cause the divine life, or God's life, to become our inner own life. Entering into ourselves, we find God in ourselves." This is a beautiful quote. In other words, by virtue of your baptism, the Trinity lives within you, right? So even though if this is a dark place on these cattle cars or in Auschwitz or in these starvation bunkers, there's still light because the God of light lives within you. And let's not forget that God lives within us by virtue of our baptism in the Eucharist. So while the Holocaust offers a lot of horrific events of mass shootings and concentration camps, and it's really kind of, as one priest friend says to me, it's kind of an antechamber to hell, we must also remember that this most troubled time had countless heroic stories like Maximilian Kolbe and Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. And you know some of these stories, and I've heard so many of these stories, but really in heaven you're going to really hear some of these little beautiful heroic stories that are just made in this time of darkness and the self-sacrifice that's made. There's always going to be light shining in the darkness of Christ, and you were called, of course, to be that ray of light for others. The darkness then will not overcome it. I do want to conclude just really quickly with Pope Pius XII. I want to sneak this in here because I want to have a word here. I'm not here to kind of defend him, but I want to kind of clear the air here that, he has his reputation's been run through the mud, I think very, very unfairly. Now, if you're quote-unquote Pope, you're going to have to pick a strategy, right? I mean, you all have to pick a strategy. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback, but when you're in charge, trust me, being a leader is a lot harder than it looks. So instead of being all judgy, I think is sometimes to say, let's just look at what he did, right? And we'll let God determine that. So in 1917, Eugenio Pacelli was appointed the papal nuncio for Bavaria, southern Germany, and in 1920 he's made the nuncio for all of, so by divine providence, he's the Pope's representative for Germany in the 20s. During this time, of course, he's seeing the rise of this very nasty regime with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party between 1918 and 19. He's very familiar with it. He's there. He sees it. He's made a cardinal, or created a cardinal in 1929. He's appointed Vatican Secretary of State by Pope Pius XI. Cardinal Pacelli is elected to the papacy Now, this is something. On March 2nd, 1939, this is just like basically 6 months or less than that before the outbreak of the war on September 1st. It's the briefest conclave in 300 years. So in one day, they said, you're the guy, right, that's going to lead us through this horrific time. So the war clouds are certainly looming when he becomes pope. I mean, this is a little bit like the Abraham Lincoln thing during the Civil War. Sometimes divine providence just puts these people in these situations. You go, man, I'm glad I'm not you, because that is one hard role that you have. While the Cardinal Nuncio in Germany before the war, Pacelli had delivered, now just weird, it's not like he's soft in Nazism. Everybody knows where he stands. He has 44 allocutions, or just very public things where he is condemned and contained attacks on Nazism. On October 20th, this is about a month and a half after the war, he delivers his first encyclical and attacks Nazi Germany and fascist ideology. He knows this is an idol. He knows this is very, very evil. He recognizes the central problem of this totalitarian form of government, and his focus that the state, in some sense, is all-encompassing over the individual. And it exalts the state in a sense that becomes an idol, like a golden calf. Once again, the Nazis are not pleased with the outspoken criticism of the Pope. They know what he's doing, and they don't like him. They have their eye on him very close. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland, Pius XII embraced the wartime policies. Now, this is where he gets a little critical of it. So Pius XI was like, we're going to be neutral. So he just said, we're going to stay neutral. We're not going to have these huge, big outblasting things. We're certainly not going to agree with it, but we're going to do something. He decides to use the tactic of we're going to work secretly. We're going to use our channels of communication. We're going to hide Jews. We're going to find every opportunity we can to save them behind the scenes. That's what he chose to do. In fact, he tells many of his kind of high-ups, help make fake baptismal certificates and give them to the Jews, right, to help them in any way they possibly can. There's an example of a false Polish baptismal certificate issued to a Jewish child during World War II. So thousands and thousands of false baptismal certificates to give to the Jews. He also orders bishops quietly and priests to hide as many of the Jewish population as they can. And by the way, in Italy, where he had the most influence, the stats show that he saved something like 85% of the Jewish population was rescued. I mean, compare that to a place like Holland, where a huge percentage of the Jews were deported and killed. Pius ordered churches, convents, monasteries to hide Jews, even directing that Jews be hidden in the cloistered areas. He hid 200 himself within the Vatican, including the chief rabbi of Rome, Israel Zoli, who converted to the Catholic faith because of Pius XII. And I think he actually took the name Pacelli. So we're going to see here in just a second. He said Pius XII did more of leaders than anybody else did. So I'm not quite sure why his name got so besmirched over the years. Pius XII had been criticized for not taking sides and doing more to help the Jews. In reality, it is a very delicate situation. For example, the Dutch bishops very early in the game, they came out strong and hard and publicly denounced Nazi mistreatment of Jews in 1942. What do the Nazis do? What do you think they're going to do? They retaliated big time, and they increased the number of Jewish deportations, including many Jews who had converted to the Catholic faith, including the Edith Stein, St. Teresa Benedict of the Cross. So they just, in some sense, the public outspoken coming down with a hammer backfired big time on the Jews in the Dutch area. Holland witnessed the largest percentage of Jews deported during the war. 79% of the total Jewish population was gone. Bishops in Nazi-controlled territory cautioned Pope Pius, hey, look what happened here. Don't come out too strong because they are just going to retaliate. Work secretly and behind the scenes. After the war, individual Jews and many Jewish organizations actually thanked Pius XII and the church for its heroic activity of the Pope and other Catholics. The chief rabbi of Rome during the war converted to the faith. He took the name Eugenio due to the witness of the Pope toward the Jews. He said, no hero in all history was more heroic than Pope Pius in his readiness to defend the children of God. Now, how could he say that if he was that bad, if Pius was that bad? So he is very much on the side of Pius XII. A stat for you, the Catholic Church, under the pontificate of Pius XII, was very instrumental in saving as many, now this number is contested, but as many as 860,000 Jews from certain death at the hands of Nazi hands. 30% of the Jews who served during, and survived the war. This figure exceeds by far those of any other churches the church did the most and rescued organizations combined. Moreover, this achievement stands in startling contrast to the unpardonable foot-dragging and hypocritical lip service of those outside Hitler's reach, who certainly disposed of far greater means to rescue Jews, including the International Red Cross and the Western democracies in general. No pope in history has been more thanked hardly by the Jews themselves, right? It was only post-war that with these plays and these other things that came out where Pius's name got dragged through the mud. By the way, they've opened up the archives. I think it's Francis who opened up the archives and said, go ahead, we'll let you go through the archives. You can see the letters. We'll let you, we're not hiding anything. And the more and more they look at this stuff, the more they're realizing he actually did do a lot. He's been very, very, very unfairly treated in the 20th century. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, by the way, 700 priests were rounded up, shot, and killed. 3 million Poles were eventually sent to concentration camps. 3,000 priests from all over Europe were sent to concentration camps, about 1,000 perishing. The Nazis tried to eradicate the faith from Germany through both nonviolent methods, including exaltation of Hitler as a supreme leader, and violently through arrest, torture, and execution of Christians, criticized the government and its nefarious policy. So it wasn't just the Jews. It was anybody who criticized Hitler and his regime was out to get it. Now, in closing here, I just the last couple of things for you. So next time, what we're going to cover here is the American contribution to the war. I know we've been waiting to get there, and we'll do. Hopefully, we can do this justice for you because I know many of your family members have fought in the war. So the doc will do a fantastic job of covering D-Day and Lend-Lease and just kind of the strategy of dealing with the European crisis that was there. I am doing the research right now on the Pacific Theater, and I'll cover that side, eventually getting to the atomic bomb. So that's going to be a very, very full session with the Americans there to really, and it's nice to know what are we fighting against, right? Not only for our values, but we're fighting against this stuff that we just heard today. The last lesson will only be about an hour long or so. We'll do lessons learned from World War II, and we'll take some questions from you. Before you head out, the doc wanted to come up here for just a second, and I think he had about 5 minutes of just some comments. Is that right, Doc? He wanted to say here? He just wanted to show his face a little bit, I think. So so he wants to come up here and say a few words here. And then once he's done, I'll give you a blessing, and then we'll stick around for some questions.
All right, test. Can you hear me? Everybody tired? All right, good. This is promised to be 4.5 minutes, and that's all. Father, thank you for this unbelievably comprehensive presentation on what's amazingly dark. It's amazingly dark. And hopefully what I just want to add just a couple of comments quickly. And they just kind of are almost like just to end what we've talked about tonight. First of all, as Father said, I'm going to reinforce this. This is a vexing, incomprehensible study of human nature. If you're going to look at history, you've got to look and say, how do human beings act when things happen to them? And you look at what the Nazis did and what certain heroes did in the face of Nazi oppression. It's an incomprehensible and vexing study of human nature. George Steiner was a Jewish writer. He wrote A Jewish Man Who Was an Essayist for the New Yorker. He escaped with his family from France when he was 11 years old. And one of the things he's famous for having said was, he says, we now know that a man can read Goethe or Rilke in the evening, that he can play Bach and Schubert and go to his day's work at Auschwitz in the morning. That there's this disconnect, that these people can be very cultured, very seemingly civilized, polished, talented, and be butchers. And how does that happen? And that's what we have to reconcile with. When I teach medical students about the godfather of internal medicine, William Osler, when he was going through training, he was at McGill. He put Johns Hopkins on the map. Before he went full-time back to McGill to teach, he went to Germany. And Germany was the iconic center of science and medicine and culture. He went there. It was so sophisticated. It was so advanced. And so I think we need to juxtapose that with what we've heard tonight. How on earth can a place that is the center of civilization, of sophistication, of culture, of insight, of all these leading lights, how can they ultimately have a systematic, calculating, fully documented process of killing people? The mechanization of murder, turning death into factories into death. The Wannsee Conference is the bureaucratization of genocide. It's striking, it's stunning. So the Germany of Goethe, Rilke, Beethoven, and Bach was also the Germany of Nietzsche, Marx, Heidegger in his badness, and Hitler. And that just shows you that there's darkness and there's light. So then I want to briefly say there's a science and sociology to how do we understand this? How do we read this? Ian Kershaw, Richard Evans, Joachim Fest, Volker Ulrich are all Hitler historians. Christopher Browning, Hannah Arendt are thinkers with respect to the Holocaust. And there are people out there that there's literally schools of thought on, do we go with an intentionalist school of thought, or do we go with a structuralist school of thought? You might say, oh, it's too late, I don't want to talk about this, what does this mean? And all I'll say is this, the intentionalist school of thought when it comes to understanding the Hitler and the Nazis is that this was all Hitler. He was strong, he had planned it all, and it was a straight road to Auschwitz. Whereas the structuralist perspective says Hitler was actually weaker than we thought, it was a bureaucracy, and it was a twisted road to Auschwitz. There was a chilling motto that went about the Nazi Germany called working towards the Fuhrer. And if you imagine how small movements become larger and larger, they become bureaucratic. And so Hitler couldn't manage everything. And so there were these little fiefdoms that ultimately have people bubbling up underneath them to say, well, which way would be more what the Fuhrer would want? We'd work towards the Fuhrer's will. And the ones that became more vicious were the ones that people said, that's the way to go. And so it was people that were enacting Hitler's will through a bureaucracy. So there's people that said Hitler's super strong, straight road to Auschwitz, Hitler's weak, it's a twisted road to Auschwitz, and now they're moving more towards it's a little bit of a both and. Now, obviously tonight we talk about the problem of evil. That's the overall narrative when we're studying this as Catholics. This cannot be just medicalized. This cannot be rendered into a sociological problem. This gets into the vexing nature of the problem of evil. And if you follow the story of Nazi Germany further, you go to Nuremberg. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Nuremberg yet, but there's a whole lot of there's a lot of mischaracterizations of certain things, but that's another topic. But the notion of Nuremberg, the trials that put the Nazis on trial, people accused the Allies of victor's justice. And the Nazis always fell back to the notion as I was following orders. Or it wasn't illegal, it was legal. So they followed the notion of positive law without divine or natural law. And how about Germany? Was Germany a hijacked state, or was it Hitler's willing executioners? Was everybody culpable, or just the people at the top? And what about the Nazi rat lines, the people that escaped, and the people that were complicit in helping them to escape? The Americans, many people don't recognize, Americans hired a lot of Nazi war criminals in the CIA because the new fight was against the communists. So if you read about it, it's a spooky thing to realize that some Nazi war criminals escaped justice because we helped them, because they became more valuable as an asset against the communists than they actually became people that they want to put on trial. And we got into some trouble, like with Klaus Barbie and other people like that. So we've got to think about these things. And again, as Catholics, we're armed with what the truth is, but the notion that there's evil here and it slithers in through the cracks in the window and the cracks in the door at every change, at every turn. I promise I said 5 minutes. I'm almost done, I promise. We return to the question of how. How did this happen? How did this happen? How did this happen? And the answer to start off with, we think, is, well, it's ideological intoxication. It's a secular religion. And there's a lot to be said about that. But we cannot truly reckon with this without a sense of God and the problem of evil. So I just want to say one thing kind of as we close off here. The Catholic narrative, again and again and again, is dignified, fallible, redeemable. The people are dignified because you're a child of God, you're fallible, which means you're broken, but you're still redeemable. That's the Catholic narrative in 3 words: dignified, fallible, redeemable. The problem you run into when it comes to these ideological movements is something goes askew in any one of those things. What goes askew with dignified? If we forget who we are. We are just beasts, we're pack animals, we're blocks of wood to be moved about. We forget that we are children of God. What about if we forget that we are fallible? Then we think we can all of a sudden remake heaven on earth. Solzhenitsyn once said, the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. And George Kennan once said, the fact of the matter is that there is a little bit of the totalitarian buried somewhere way deep down inside each and every one of us. And what if we forget about the redeemable, that we forget that we can't redeem ourselves, that we rely on God to redeem ourselves? Solzhenitsyn, the former prisoner in the gulags under the Soviet regime, said over a half a century ago, while I was still a child, I recall hearing a number of older people offer the following explanation for the great disasters that had befallen Russia. And we could say the same about Germany. Men have forgotten God. That is why all of this has happened. He says, since then, I've spent well nigh 50 years working on the history of our revolution. In the process, I've read hundreds of books, collected hundreds of personal testimonies, and have already contributed 8 volumes of my own toward the effort of clearing away the rubble left by that upheaval. But if I were asked today to formulate as concisely as possible the main cause of the ruinous revolution that swallowed up some 60 million of our people, I could not put it more accurately than to repeat, men have forgotten God. That's why all of this has happened. He also said the failings of human consciousness, deprived of its divine dimension, have been a determining factor in all the major crimes of the century. In closing, Evelyn Waugh, the great British writer who wrote Brideshead Revisited, if you haven't read Brideshead Revisited, check it out. He said the human mind is inspired enough when it comes to inventing horrors, but it is when it tries to invent a heaven that it shows itself cloddish. If you actually think about it, we talked about this before. Lenin said, in order to make an omelet, you have to kill people to kind of get a revolution going and bring on your utopia. In order to make an omelet, you have to break eggs. And like we've said before, where's the omelet? There is no utopia. All the killing you did never yielded a heaven on earth. It just yielded a hell on earth. So there is no omelet. And Eric Voegelin, as I said to you guys before, and William F. Buckley riffed on this, he says you can't immanentize the eschaton. You can't render imminent. You can't render present the eschaton, heaven. You cannot bring heaven on earth. And every ideology that butchers and kills millions of people, that's what they're going to do. We're going to have a utopia of class. We're going to have a utopia of race. We're going to make it. But we just got to kill the people that get in our way. Last thing I'll say. And Father, it's so hard to follow you because that was just a wonderfully comprehensive work. There's no question. Ideology, as maybe we talked about before, there's ideologies everywhere. It is the secular religion. It's the God-shaped hole that gets filled with anything but God. And whether it's power, honor, pleasure, and wealth, or whether it's a political ideology of National Socialism, fascism, communism, secularism, whatever it may be. As Nietzsche said, and he was right about this, ideologies all fail, and they devolve to decadence. And that's where we just serve our appetites. And guess what? That fails too. And when that fails, the next thing you go to is nihilism, in the sense of meaninglessness, the abyss. And the one thing I think we take away, one thing I would take away from all that Father showcased here tonight is that we don't want to live in that abyss. We've spent the night going into the darkness here, and the great thing about God is that we can turn away from the abyss and go in the other direction. I think that's why there's a lot of people who are coming back to the Catholic Church right now, because they've been faced with all these other ideologies, they've been faced with decadence, and they've been faced with nihilism, and they find them dissatisfying. Unbelievably dissatisfying. And so I think as we move into next week, which talks about the European theater and the Americans, the Pacific theater and the Americans, but just what we are fighting for and how we fight for it, we've got to remember it's an easy temptation. Ideology is an easy temptation, but it leads to decadence, it leads to nihilism, and that's the abyss. And the question is, when you get to the abyss, do you get swallowed up by it, or do you turn around and go the other way? Thanks.
All right, the Lord be with you. Through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, all the angels and all the saints, including Saint Therese and her family. May Almighty God bless you today and always, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Have a happy Thanksgiving unless I see you before. All right.